Welcome back to the Tuesday show, the Nutrimedical Report here, Genesis Network, 12 to 3 Pacific, 3 to 6 Eastern, 2 to 5 Central Time. And today we have a special guest, Joel Skousen. His newsletter is World Affairs Brief, one of the best newsletters in the world, and most level-headed, I think, calling things the way they are, rather than exaggerating it a lot of times, as oftentimes here in the alternative media things are. We also have a call to action on issues that are properly in a balance. So, welcome back to the program, Joel Skousen, and your World Affairs Brief newsletter, which people can subscribe to weekly. What are the key issues you want to talk about today, Joel?
Well, the big issue is the push for the Trans-Pacific Partnership by the administration and actually by the Republicans, the globalist Republican leaders that we have, unfortunately. It's a very bad treaty that has been treated, is not being treated as a treaty. It's being treated as a trade agreement passed by the TPA Trade Provisional Authority. Gives them the opportunity to pass this with a simple majority in Congress to evade the constitutional treaty requirements. It's just incredible to me that none of the even conservative Republicans are challenging this on constitutional grounds.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I think what they want to do is they're politicking it, so they want to make it look like that Obama can Obama's pushing it forward, but they're actually collaborating with it because the Republicans, and many of the Republicans, want this trade treaty, which is going to really cause damage to the American sovereignty.
Yeah, and it's also never been good for the Democratic side either, because big labor usually gets damaged by these treaties, and there's a lot of very special provisions. I mean, hundreds of special provisions for special corporations which lobby to be part of the treaty, special concessions. And that's one of the reasons why the government attempts to put this through as a yes or no amendment type agreement, the TPA, because when you have this many irons in the fire, this many corporations with special perks that are being given, this many countries with special perks, there's no way you're going to please enough people to ever get one of these things passed, let alone with a two-thirds majority, which it should require. Any foreign agreement with the United States is a treaty and requires a two-thirds agreement of the Senate, which is not possible to get at this time. And so there's a lot of manipulation. The big problem that they put forth is what's called the TAA. This is basically a taxpayer compensation for workers that are put out of work by the TPA, which will be many, many hundreds of thousands. So the taxpayers have to pick up the bill to retrain these people at taxpayer expense. And that's the stickler that has gone down to defeat by the Democrats. But interesting enough, they did have enough votes in the past in the House to pass the TPA, which is the trade authority, giving it the government the ability to do this as a stand-up yes or no vote at a 51% majority. Once again, the Republicans are pushing this as good for business. It's not really good for U.S. business. This is a way also around the North American Authority, because Canada and Mexico are part of this. They're billing it as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it's really Canada, Mexico, and the United States with a lot of Asia partners. I suppose the most onerous provision about this, which makes it separable from any other types of trade authority, is that there's a standing commission that is created by the TPP, and it is like the NATO Commission or the European Union Commission, has the ability to bring in new members and to change the provisions. So it's a self-standing, semi-regional government, a stepping stone to globalism, if you will, that's being passed here. And there's a sister partnership called the Transatlantic Trade Agreement, or International Agreement, and it is going to be passed after the TPP, and that puts us very much aligned with the European Union and does the same thing. So this is a very severe change. Most of the American people are against it, and unfortunately, most of the Republicans are for it. And as as they tend to be in all of these globalist types of things. They don't see the threat.
Yeah,
so
what's quite amazing is that it's a proxy world government being set up before our eyes, and it's not adhering to the constitutional requirements. How likely is it that it'll be derailed? Because apparently parts of it were detained, but it looks like they're launching it.
Well, so far it's being blocked, but look, they could give up the TAA, which is this training thing, and they've already got it passed, essentially. So I don't hold out any hope that this is going to be a block unless there's a real hue and cry from the American people to their congressmen, and it's going to have to be conservatives to their Republican congressmen to stop this, because the majority of Democrats are already on board against it. Isn't this ironic, Bill, that when it comes to issues of national sovereignty, all they've got to do is wave the flag of free trade or anti-terror stuff, and the Republicans in this knee-jerk patriotic manner get on board, and we get suborned by our own leaders, or what appear to be conservative leaders. I don't think they really are. I think a lot of them are controlled by the globalists. They had a lot of dirt on conservative leaders in Congress, and they can twist arms when they need to.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, isn't it? Now, what other major news items would you like to cover on this or any other issue?
What was that question, Bill?
What other major issues would you like to cover either on the TPP or what's going on in terms of any other major issues in the Middle East or elsewhere?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Russian stealth invasion of Ukraine, because NATO is making, and the United States are making a very token show of force to appear to be countering the Russian aggression in Ukraine and elsewhere in the Baltics by having military drills near the border of Russia, by putting in token amounts of troops, by sending over new, what the media calls tanks, but 90% of them are armored personnel vehicles, which are not tanks, which can't stop Russian armor, are very vulnerable. So it's a very, very token response, but it is handing to Putin the excuse to go before his people and make it appear as if the U.S. is being aggressive in countering Russia, and Russia still denies any involvement in Ukraine, which is patently false.
Right.
So it's a very complex situation. It's one of those situations that was talked about in this week's Bilderberg meeting, which is just ending. Last week's World Affairs Brief was all about the Bilderberg Organization and the New World Order in general, and that's probably the major issue to cover. In fact, if people request a free sample copy, which they're allowed to do, of the World Affairs Brief before they subscribe, they'll get this issue on the Bilderberg Organization. It's probably the most in-depth piece I've ever done on the Bilderberg Group. As you know, they publish a list, Bill, of the people who are going to attend, and it's not anywhere near the amount of people that secretly attend. There are a lot of people that attend that don't want their name on the list, but they put out enough people whose name is on the list to let you know there's a tremendous amount of media people, politicians, government officials, former government officials, and business leaders. You know, you go through the list of business leaders and you say, well, so what? There's the chairman of Alcoa Aluminum. He's got a national aluminum business. Why shouldn't he go to the Bilderberg meeting? Well, you find out then that there's more to it. In the World Affairs Brief this week, I give a breakdown of each of these business leaders and show what their globalist background is. 4 or 5 of them from the United States, for example, show up as on the Bilderberg steering committee. Meaning they're not just building business leaders.
Exactly. They're building a new world order with them and their transnational corporations as a new proxy government. Welcome back. We have Joel's latest newsletter. Very big analysis of the Bilderberger Group. What are they really up to? Of course, is the title. Next, of course, is Jeb Bush talks tough about Russia and Berlin. Do you want to comment on that, Joel?
Well, let's, kind of work through our conversation on the Bilderberg Group, one of the things I want to make clear, which I have long made clear, is that the Bilderberg is not a complete meeting of all the top globalist conspirators against liberty. They do always have some of the top people there, but it's more like a leadership conference where old-time globalists meet with your top leaders, and you have a lot of new and up-and-coming globalists that are being vetted, being checked out to see how they respond to the latest globalist agenda. The Bilderberg organization has come under a lot of scrutiny in the last 10 years. There's even an organization called Bilderberg.org, which exposes, who they are. They don't understand the complete, conspiracy against liberty, but they certainly are critical of the Bilderberg Group and have a lot of good information there. But the important thing to understand is that there are dozens of globalist organizations, and I think that this has been done on purpose to make sure that if any one organization gets exposed or taken down or embarrassed or discredited, then they can switch to another. And that's been the way that this has operated for many, many decades, in fact, many centuries, starting with the Illuminati in 1776 and the Masonic movement, which are all part Vatican, and many parts of the Jesuit movement involved in this global conspiracy against liberty. But they can switch easily now. There's a, Council on Foreign Relations. There's a Trilateral Commission. There's the Royal Institute of International Affairs in Britain. There's the Council on Foreign Relations in Germany, in Berlin. There's the Club of Rome, the Committee at 300. There's the Aspen Institute. So there's literally, over a dozen organizations that are part of this globalist conspiracy, and a lot of interlocking people belong to these. For example, a decade ago, I found out that the leaders held their pre-Bilderberg planning session at the Aspen Institute. And they held it at the City of London last year before the Bilderberg meeting. I don't know where they held it this year. And so the Bilderberg meeting itself is not where a lot of this conspiratorial discussion goes on. There's a lot of mainstream type presentations in the general session. I'm sure there's a lot of subjects that are covered, and I list them in the World Affairs Brief. One of the hot subjects that I'm sure they were covering in the World Affairs Brief is how to keep the EU from imploding with a Greek default, how to keep the Greeks in the EU even though they're going to default, and how to keep that from spreading to Italy, Europe, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, which are also in very near default. I'm sure they also discussed the U.S. election. That was on the list. But, of course, they don't tell the details of how they're planning on manipulating the election. And so I did cover that Jeb Bush and many other globalists generally attend Bilderberg meeting prior to being vetted for candidacy in the United States. I think that Jeb Bush was slated to be there this year, and that's why he had a cover story of giving a speech in Berlin just prior to the Bilderberg meeting. I think he was then going to slip into the Bilderberg meeting and out. But it got leaked that he was going to attend, and so they made all kinds of denials. He may or may not have attended. I don't think we'll ever know. It's pretty difficult to track someone over there when they can land surreptitiously at the Bilderberg meeting at this Alpine resort in Austria by helicopter if need be. But it was interesting that in his speech in Berlin, which was sponsored by Angela Merkel and her Christian Democrats there, they're very much globalist. Well, it's hard to say really in terms of Merkel. Merkel, of course, is a former communist, and I put former in quotes, from East Germany, is good friends with Putin. Whether or not she's playing as a globalist by getting involved with the United States in West Germany, or whether or not she's still a communist, it's hard to tell.
She seems to fluctuate, doesn't she? She seems to fluctuate.
But I suspect that Bush's remarks attacking Russia were part of the globalist agenda. In other words, it's kind of complicated in the sense that the globalists really don't want to attack Russia, and they don't want Russia to get so aggressive that it would force the globalists, the U.S. and NATO, to confront Russia openly in Ukraine or other places. And that's why Russia continues to do their stealth attacks rather than open attacks. So the U.S., though, in order to maintain credibility as the opposer, ostensibly, of tyranny in the world, has to back sanctions against Russia. But when you look at them, of course, they're very token sanctions.
Right.
The U.S. hasn't even cut off oil imports from Russia. That shows how weak these sanctions are. They keep talking about sanctions, but they're really only dictated or directed towards Putin's cronies that surround him. Not Putin himself is worth billions of dollars. They're essentially attacking their ability to use the international financial system. But these people are wealthy, and they have a tremendous ability to get around or work around this particular system of sanctions. So I don't give much credibility to them at all.
In other words, it's a dance that's for public consumption, is what you're saying.
To advance what, Bill?
It's a dance to give public consumption of a false agenda.
Yeah, the agenda is very complex. The agenda has to do with the fact that the globalists want a third world war. They need a war to create enough impetus for Americans to give up sovereignty and join a militarized global government. I mean, if you think that opposition to the TPP is strong, you would imagine how much opposition there would be during peacetime to the United States signing away national sovereignty, joining a militarized global government with a new currency, with a global control over the currency. The United States just, wouldn't go along with it. But
right.
If the government allows Russia and China to continue to build towards nuclear war and then attack the United States, and if they let that attack, that first preemptive nuclear strike fall, it's not going to fall on cities per se, except those that are integrally involved with the military. But if they were to let that fall, then it becomes very easy for a nation whose military has been decapitated to be talked into salvation through joining in a global government, a militarized global government.
When we come back, we'll talk about more of these issues and survivability, and an interesting comment you made about the Terra Vivos and public bunker shelters. When we come back, as you're a prepper and a consultant expert on this area. Back in just a moment with Joel Skousen, worldaffairsbrief.com is the website. And welcome back. And Joel's here to give us further analysis. So we can continue on the last topic, or we can move on to Turkish government involvement in ISIS, or any other topics in your latest newsletter, Joel.
Well, I think we need to finish up with the Bilderberg group first. It's all really intertwined because, you see, the globalist agenda is to create conflict to justify the destruction of American civil rights through the phony war on terror, which has essentially been created by the government. And so ISIS is a continuation of that phony war on terror. Basically, they have two problems. One is that the al-Qaeda threat, which they manufactured, under Osama bin Laden, which worked for the CIA for many years, established al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was a U.S.-British intelligence operation at the very top, worked through the Saudis with financing, with arms, as well as Pakistani ISI was very much involved as well. Now, that doesn't mean that the actual terrorists working for al-Qaeda realized that at the top there was control like this. But it was really wearing off. Everyone was claiming to be al-Qaeda. The United States people weren't moved by that anymore. And so they had to create ISIS as an international threat. And that's why they started with all of these beheadings of various different nationalities, a Brit, an American, a Frenchman, and various other things, so that suddenly everyone would feel like they had been attacked by this new terror threat, ISIS. In fact, it was created not only for that reason of engendering an international terror threat, but specifically to get back at Assad, because the U.S. invasion of Syria in the so-called no-fly zone, that would have been an invasion like Libya, was put on hold because of Kerry's incautious remarks at a London press conference, which gave Syria an out to avoid the invasion by giving up chemical weapons. And so the U.S. had to concoct ISIS as a new terror threat in order to have a reason to get back into Syria, because ISIS supposedly originates within Syria. And they had to attack a foreign country, so it looked like a threat that wasn't just like the other rebels attacking Assad in Syria, that it was actually a threat to the world by attacking Iraq and making all these flamboyant claims about going to attack Europe and the United States. In fact, the U.S. did a lot of disinformation by leaking to Judicial Watch about a camp that they had established over on the other side of the Mexican border, supposedly an ISIS camp. There were videos of the Muslims shooting machine guns, fully automatic weapons, at a training site in Tennessee. And all of these are government black operations. They film the videos, and the proof of that is that nothing ever happens from them. There's no cross-border attack from this camp in Mexico. There's no cross-border or cross-state attack from this group in Tennessee. And if the U.S. has videotape of this, obviously they know where these people are and who they are. So there's a tremendous amount of false flag, phony terrorism going on to keep this war on terror before the American people. It's very much part of the globalist agenda. Now, I'm not sure how much of that is openly discussed at Bilderberg. It's probably easier to keep a lot of people who believe in globalism from an idealistic point of view, to keep them on board by not discussing. In fact, that's why I'm sure they don't discuss the real ultimate agendas. I don't think they've ever discussed at Bilderberg that all this is leading to a World War III, and that the United States actually wants Russia and China to rebuild, be aggressive, and attack the United States. I don't think that's ever mentioned at all, except in the higher inner circles, people who are privy to that level of the conspiracy and the direction that it's going to take.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so,
that's important. So basically, one of the things is, and I've had contacts on the other side. When I went up and gave a lecture 4 years ago in Los Angeles, I had a movie producer who actually knew some billionaires, and a lot of them are not exactly on side with the globalist agenda. They realize a lot of these plans they have are going to destroy not only their business, but it's also going to make the world, in many ways, very dangerous and uninhabitable. And a lot of them are not keen on either a private bunker or a public bunker, like we talked Terra Vivos with Robert Vicino the other day on the program. And you mentioned some interesting comments about this, because you're an expert on preparedness. And, of course, you have a number of books about this, which I consider if you want to call it the Bible of how to get prepared, because even something as simple as a power outage from a coronal mass ejection or a cyber attack or a nuclear detonation, a nuclear war is survivable, but some of these things, if you're not privately ready for the kind of chaos that is going to occur, it's really going to be more than rough. And a lot of the globalists, the billionaires, are not keen on what they have to go through in order to get their, quote, New World Order. I don't think it's 100%. It's like trying to herd, in the words of someone I heard years ago, try to herd cats. The only thing you can do is make the cats jump out of the backyard if you get a very, very big dog. But I don't think it's going to be an easy sell, even to the people that are so-called power brokers.
Well, it won't be until it actually happens. In other words, most of the power brokers probably don't know about the ultimate war agenda. They probably believe the government propaganda about the war on terror. And, of course, everybody's starting to believe that Russia and China are getting more aggressive. What's important is that the United States continues to downplay that aggression, even if they talk it up. You know, it's one thing to say, yeah, this is a real problem. We object to Russia's stealth invasion of Ukraine, but it's another thing to, really talk about how Russia's preparing for nuclear war with the West and how China's preparing for nuclear. They're not talking about that. In fact, the United States just announced today that they had reached an agreement for another joint military exercise with China. So all the while China's building up military facilities in the Spratly Islands, which are claimed by 3 or 4 countries, and the United States claims to protesting that. What are we doing? We're not actually putting up a naval blockade to stop them. We're suggesting more military exercises so that they can get comfortable with our military technology and so that their ships and planes can eavesdrop on the types of communications that we use during a military exercise. Right. This is not suicide, Bill. This is not stupidity. This is a globalist agenda to create conflict, to build enemies, to eventually get those enemies to strike the West, and then to generate a powerful 9/11 type reaction to people. We must do this, and this will be joined in a militarized global government to prosecute this war because our troops have been decapitated with this preemptive nuclear strike. Now, going to the protection side of it, I've, for over 40 years, been designing high-security residences and retreats. And I've consulted on a number of joint community-type projects, and almost always I have rejected them, what they propose, because they have some advertising gimmick involved in. In other words, they call it the Citadel or the Fortress, or there's one called Terra Vivos that you mentioned. Living basically underground. It's an underground bunker system. It's like condominiums that you buy into. But you think about this. They have to advertise in order to sell these things. And so the whole world knows that in Nebraska, there and several other places, there are these Terra Vivos underground bunker systems. And they're going to have one hardened entrance. And it's one thing to have a hardened entrance, but what do you do if there are 300 or 400 people camped out of that entrance waiting for the door to open? The armed guard's going to start shooting people to let you in, and how are you going to get close enough to show your ID? So it's just stupid to think that you're going to pay 50 or 60 grand for a place in this so-called secure place, and they haven't thought out the strategy enough. That's why I say that if you do need to have fallout protection, you do need to have the edge. Persons should do that in their home with secured underground basement space that is hidden, it's concealed.
Exactly.
And
Joel, how do they get in touch with you to get also your preparedness books, etc., or to consult with you?
I have a website, which is my name, joelskousen.com. That's JOELSKOUSEN, joelskousen.com. And on there, all my books are showcased. I have my masterwork. It's called The Secure Home, over 700 pages with everything about design and engineering of these high-security structures, homes, and self-sufficiency. It talks about generators, solar, water power, wind power. It's really the most complete manual out there on building a high-security retreat. Of course, it's important to find the right location. That's why I wrote the book. After several years of consulting, I wrote the book Strategic Relocation, which is the bestseller in the field of location. And it's very important. It covers international as well as every state of the Union and all the provinces of Canada. And where the best places to go, where the unsafe areas are, where the threats are. It has complete nuclear targets, earthquake maps, tornado maps, all the types of things, and color maps of each state, which shows the land use that is available in each state, so you know what's available, what's private, and what's not. So these books can be reviewed and purchased at joelskousen.com. You can also find my books on amazon.com. If people are interested in my World Affairs Brief, that's a separate website called worldaffairsbrief.com, and you can get to either site from joelskousen.com or worldaffairsbrief.com. And it says right there on the summary of the current brief, which is about the Bilderberg meeting, how to get a free sample issue by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com.
Yeah, and you do, I consider, one of the best newsletters in the world, and we're very level-headed. Plus, your response to dealing with things like preparedness you recommend a private way of approaching this rather than a community or a public underground shelter. And you have much more logical approaches to this that can make it much more doable, affordable, and also get people out of the areas of danger. Danger. By reading your books, they'll be much better prepared to know exactly how to approach this in a logical fashion. Now, one of the things we've done...
And the books also are designed with architectural details. I don't just talk about things. I give you the drawings so that you can actually do this. These things are designed for the do-it-yourselfer. You can give it to a contractor to implement as well. But I recommend that people learn to have the skills to implement their own high security and self-sufficiency, because in a crisis, you're not going to be able to hire a sole repairman to come and repair. You're going to have your spare parts and know enough about your system and how to, plug and play and replace some of the stuff. You'll know how to fix a generator. You need to have tools for these things. So it's really a total package of preparedness that I recommend.
Yeah, and you have layers of preparedness. I have already, for example, a water recovery system from the roof. The water's turned off. I have already done radar evaluations where I can dig a well on my property. I've done things like working with the wing generator project with Professor McCanney, but I already have a 20 kilowatt backup generator with an immediate transfer switch. So if the power goes out, because I expect that, and having worked with the government, one of the first things that the government will do as part of this false flag is they're going to shut off the power. If it's not hit by the cyber attack or an EMP, the government will itself shut it off as part of their process of amplifying the catastrophe.
Yeah, they tend to do things, but, only really, in my opinion, war is a big enough catastrophe for them to justify it. Otherwise, it really makes a lot of people mad. Same thing with martial law. Martial law takes hundreds of thousands of troops to implement. It slows the economy down 50%, which is disastrous. So you don't dare pull one of those things over a minor or even a moderate amount of, racial unrest or other types of things. People just really get mad at government, and it convinces people that there is a conspiracy to take away liberty. But in war, everybody lays down and says, whatever you say, government, whatever you say.
I've got a detection, though. I have friends and business partners and people I work with in Russia and China. I don't get the impression, talking to professionals, that the general population in these countries are at all interested in going to war with America. It must be just a small clique.
It's a government conspiracy. It's not the people. Even in Germany, the German people didn't want to go to war with the West. It was a conspiracy of power. And ultimately, it's a satanic conspiracy or revelation, we know about the occultic connections that Hitler had, and I'm sure that Stalin and Lenin had them as well, and our own globalists do. Nobody sets up a nuclear war on their own country, which threatens their own wealth, power, and prestige, unless they've been promised some sort of immunity from higher powers that they believe can deliver. And I think that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, in other words, it's a level of evil that transcends the normal, we call common sense of the average person.
Yeah, too many people think, I just can't imagine. Nobody would be evil enough, to not warn people of Pearl Harbor. But there were. Our government was that evil. Nobody, they say, would be evil enough to place explosives in the World Trade Centers and kill 3,000 people. But there were. It actually happened. And it couldn't have been terrorists. We've proven that. Couldn't have loaded those buildings with explosives, and they did come down with explosives, not the airliners, which were done, to excuse the controlled demolition of the buildings. But our government purposely took out 3,800 lives and 9/11 more to justify continued destruction of American constitutional liberties, the war on terror, and it's still going on. And they're still using it. They're using it to justify NSA spying. They're using it to justify the need for, global governance in many regards. So it's a long-term process, and it's time that people wake up to the fact that we may not win this. It may be too late, and that's why I'm into preparedness as well as warning people about the problem, because we have to prepare for a takedown. In other words, the worst thing conservatives could do is to promise each other, we're going to win this. All we got to do is elect a Republican the next day, and we're going to win this. We're going to turn this around. All the while, they don't prepare for what the globalists are going to bring upon us. And while you fight to preserve and change things, you prepare for the takedown.
Exactly. And also you prepare for the fact that even a nuclear war is very survivable. I talked and took care of people that survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I remember talking to them, and they literally on the other side of a church building where if you were on the wrong side, you were turned into a shadow on the concrete or on the rocks of the church building. And on the other side, if you didn't drink the black rain and you got detoxified with miso soup, etc., you were fine. The people should understand that nuclear war is very survivable. Even EMP attacks are survivable if you're properly prepared. And that the aftermath is usually only a few weeks. We're not talking about years of underground inhabitation. And people should be prepared for, rebuilding a society after this happens. What I see is people should become aware now so we don't have to go through this very painful process around the world. And books like yours and newsletters like yours should be translated into every language, because people should be prepared in every country, because the globalists are hell-bent on doing this, and they're racing toward a catastrophe. And, it's hard to believe that they did 9/11, but they did. It's hard to believe that they did Oklahoma City, but they did. Again, it was the government did it. It's hard to believe that they probably planned before Obama leaves another 9/11 type event. And they'll blame it on ISIS or ISIL, that's a functionary extension of our intelligence agencies. It's extremely disturbing to know this.
It's very improbable, the fact that they're pulling another 9/11 prior to Obama leaving. The reason I say that is because these things are so complex. They make so many mistakes. They built the conspiracy movement by triple or quadruple because of 9/11. The JFK built the conspiracy movement a tremendous amount, and they tripled and quadrupled it, I think, during 9/11 because of all. And fully a third of the American people outright don't believe the government. So that's millions of people. Now, they're not all activists, but I think they're very reluctant to pull off these things if they can continue to, keep people backing this war on terror. They're going to wait to the next big one, which is the actual war itself, where they let a nuclear strike fall on our American military. And that's what I think they're waiting for. I don't think we'll see another 9/11 before.
That could be some years off then. Let's hope you're correct and it's years off and we have time to actually turn this back so it doesn't happen at all. But more and more of the people are waking up.
It will happen, but we do have time to prepare.
Absolutely. Amazing discussion today. Joel, thank you very much for coming on the air. Again, worldaffairsbrief.com and Joel Skousen, SKOUSEN.com. Thank you for coming on, and coming up in hour number 2, our Health and Wellness Hour, Tim Alexander in hour 3. Tomorrow, hour number 1, Harley Schlanger and the Roos Foundation. I'll be back in just